This seemingly unremarkable photo shows three smiling friends from South Tyneside, England: Richard Spottiswoode, Darren Bonner, and Lucy Byrne, during a brief getaway to Northumberland. Hours after it was taken, Bonner would be found naked and dying in a shallow grave. Bonner, just 24 years old, had worked for Spottiswoode at his garage, and the two had grown close while running a small cannabis operation together. Byrne, Spottiswoode's girlfriend at the time, was allegedly unaware of her boyfriend's side business. Nonetheless, in July 2017, the trio took a weekend trip to the Cresswell Towers Caravan Park in Northumberland, United Kingdom. One evening during the weekend, an argument broke out when Spottiswoode accused Bonner of spying for a rival drug gang. Byrne later told investigators that she had already gone to bed by the time tensions escalated, and by the morning, Bonner was gone. Though the timeline is unclear based on news reports, at some point Bonner sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating, "I have fallen out with Spotty. He's going to do us in." Byrne and Spottiswoode then left the caravan park without their friend, though Spottiswoode allegedly refused to let Byrne check the trunk of their van. She also said that shortly after leaving, he pulled over at a nearby park, disappeared for about 10 minutes, and returned really sweaty, as though he'd been exerting himself. Supposedly asking nothing of it, the couple drove back to South Tyneside. At about 8 o'clock British summertime, a walker on the Northumberland coast heard loud snoring noises near a dry stone wall. Alarmed, they called the police. Police located a body after a brief search, buried in a shallow grave. It was Bonner. He had been stripped naked and covered with branches and brush. Though he was still alive when officers reached him, he was unresponsive, curled into a fetal position, shivering and moaning in distress. It was clear that he had bursted blood vessels in his face, and it was later confirmed that he had also suffered around 12 blows to his back from a rod-shaped weapon. He was immediately taken to the hospital and identified by his fingerprints. Once his identity was proven, police investigated to find out who he had been with most recently. 3 days later, authorities arrived at the home of Spottiswoode and Byrne, where both were arrested. During questioning, Detective Chief Inspector Andy Fairlam from Northumbria Police stated that Spottiswoode claimed that Bonner had just wandered off, or someone had come into the caravan while he was asleep, assaulted him, and had taken him away. Later, during the trial, Spottiswoode claimed that Bonner was acting aggressively, forcing him to put him in a chokehold. Not only did he blame Bonner for digging the shallow hole he was eventually found in, but that his clothes happened to just fall off of him. 16 days later, having been left with permanent brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain during the attack and abandonment, Darren Bonner passed away. During a post-mortem investigation on Bonner's body, it was obvious that he had been beaten and strangled, as a broad ligature mark was apparent on his neck, burst blood vessels in his face, and a number of bruises and abrasions, including the 12 blows to the back from this rod-shaped weapon. Byrne, originally charged with his murder, denied any knowledge of Bonner's death, but after court proceedings began, she told police that Spottiswoode had asked her to lie to them. While still denying playing any part in the murder, she was able to plead guilty to assisting an offender, affording her just a 30-month prison sentence. Spottiswoode was convicted of murder and given a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years. In a victim impact statement, Darren Bonner's mother, Louise Tumulty, said her son was a lovely, friendly character, but also vulnerable and easily led as he was loyal and trusting. Miss Tumulty, who went to her son's bedside in intensive care, said that even after the life support machines were turned off, Bonner fought for a further 9 days, earning him the nickname Lionheart among nurses. Tumulty added, "He was no threat to those who destroyed his and our lives. I hope they suffer every minute of every day forever for doing this, as I am." On January 26, 2011, a blizzard hit Philadelphia, prompting Ellen Greenberg, a first-grade teacher at Juniata Park Academy, to leave work and return to her apartment in the Manayunk neighborhood, which she shared with her fiancé, Samuel Goldberg. Goldberg, however, was at a nearby gym when Ellen arrived back home. When he returned, he found the apartment door secured with a swing latch. Calling out to Ellen, he received no response, causing him to knock the door down, where he stumbled into a horrific scene. Ellen was dead, and the apartment was covered in blood. Immediately, Goldberg called 911 and stated that Greenberg had stabbed herself and fell on a knife. At approximately 6:40 p.m., ambulances arrived at the apartment complex, and Greenberg was pronounced dead. Her body was covered in 20 stab wounds, including 10 to her back and neck. The crime scene was initially treated as a suicide, as Goldberg had allegedly not been present at the time, and the door had been latched shut. The Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, however, ruled the case as a homicide. The next day, the Philadelphia Police Department challenged that conclusion, stating that while they were considering the manner of death as suspicious at this time, homicide was not yet definitive. Just 1 day after the death of Ellen, permission to clean and sanitize the entire apartment was given from the police. James Schwartzman, Samuel Goldberg's uncle, and the chairman of the Pennsylvania Judicial Conduct Board in Pennsylvania, also entered the apartment that day to retrieve work and personal laptops, phones, and credit cards belonging to both Goldberg and Ellen, including Ellen's iPhone and 2 of her computers. The following day, on January 28th, police returned to the scene after gaining a search warrant, retrieving the items taken by Schwartzman. 7 years later, in early 2018, the Office of Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro took over the case. In 2019, a spokesperson for Shapiro stated that computer searches made on Ellen's computer pointed toward her death being a suicide, and that the investigation had been closed. Of course, legal representation for the Greenberg family disputed this evidence on the laptop, stating that James Schwartzman had taken possession of Ellen's iPhone and 2 computers for at least a day, breaking the chain of custody. The Philadelphia police had also sent Ellen's computers to the Philadelphia Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory for a forensic examination, which, despite doing keyword searches on each computer, the examination did not reveal anything remarkable. The Greenberg legal team also provided new material amounting to more than 10 gigabytes of evidence, including extensive forensic reports and medical analysis. It included 3D reconstructions of all 20 stab wounds Ellen sustained, and lengthy depositions from 3 Philadelphia medical examiner officials, one of whom stated that at least one of the wounds was likely inflicted after Ellen was already dead. On March 15, 2019, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran an investigation highlighting the inconsistencies surrounding Ellen Greenberg's death. Pittsburgh forensic pathologist Cyril H. Wecht reviewed the evidence and called the case strongly suspicious of homicide, adding that he could not understand how it had ever been ruled a suicide. Forensic scientist Henry Lee, known for his role in the O.J. Simpson trial, examined the case files as well and stated that the wounds and bloodstain patterns were consistent with a homicide scene. A major point of dispute centers on the stab wounds said to have penetrated Greenberg's brain. Wayne K. Ross, a forensic expert hired by the Greenberg family, argued that injuries to the brain and spinal cord would have caused intense pain, nerve damage, and traumatic brain injury. The original medical report, however, claimed that neuropathologist Lucy Ballion Rourke Adams had reviewed the case and found no such wound. But when the Philadelphia Inquirer contacted her 7 years later, Rourke Adams wrote that she had no recollection of such a case, and believed she had likely never examined the specimen at all. The newspaper confirmed this by finding no bill, invoice, or report from her associated with the case. When initially investigating the case, it was believed the apartment door had been secured from the inside with a swing bar latch, and early reports stated that Samuel Goldberg had a security guard with him when he broke it open. But the building manager later noted that a latch swing bar did not necessarily prove Ellen had locked the door herself. The security guard also clarified that he wasn't present when Goldberg forced the door, and security footage showed Goldberg riding the elevator alone just before he called 911. Later that same year, in October 2019, Ellen Greenberg's parents filed a civil suit against the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office and Marlon Osborne, the pathologist who performed the autopsy. They sought to have the manner of death changed to either homicide or undetermined, pointing to new evidence and Osborne's own admission that he altered the ruling at the urging of police. Advances in photogrammetry, technology not available at the time of her death, allowed investigators to build a 3D reconstruction of her injuries, revealing that several of the stab wounds could not have been self-inflicted. In February 2022, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office under Shapiro reaffirmed that her death was a suicide. In July 2022, online investigators uncovered ties between Josh Shapiro and the families of Samuel Goldberg and James Schwartzman, including membership at the same synagogue, though these ties have been criticized by many as being far too loose. In February 2025, the pathologist who originally ruled Ellen Greenberg's death as suicide signed a statement reversing his position. He wrote that it is my professional opinion Ellen's manner of death should be designated as something other than suicide. Because he no longer works for the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, his revised opinion carries no legal weight and does not alter the official death certificate. Then, Chief Medical Examiner Lindsay Simon, Philadelphia's current top pathologist, released a 32-page report reaffirming the original suicide ruling. She acknowledged that the pattern of injuries is admittedly unusual, but argued that Greenberg would be capable of inflicting these injuries herself. Simon also stated that the defect noted in Greenberg's spinal cord could have been caused accidentally by an autopsy probe, not by a stab wound. And even if the spinal cord injury occurred while Greenberg was still alive, Simon concluded it would not have incapacitated her or prevented her from continuing to move. While Ellen Greenberg's family still seeks justice for their daughter, a documentary series examining and further popularizing the case, Death in Apartment 603, What Happened to Ellen Greenberg, debuted on September 29, 2025, on ABC News Studios and Hulu. On Sunday, November 26, 2006, Venezuelan police arrived at the home of Richard Nilton Carrillo Draconis, a Peruvian national, based on accusations of rape. These accusations came from the University of Zulia in the city of Maracaibo, Venezuela, where a serial rapist had raped 25 female college students. One of the alleged victims pointed to Richard as the perpetrator. Despite overwhelming evidence proving his innocence, including testimony from 125 witnesses who refuted the accusations, Richard was arrested and jailed without trial. From the start, the police case against him relied on weak and contradictory statements. While awaiting trial, Carrillo requested to be placed in protective custody due to the nature of the allegations. Richard had been living in the country for 15 years, where he produced handmade Peruvian sculptures, as well as painting and masonry work. In 2005, he moved to Maracaibo. Upon learning of Richard's imprisonment, his community did not hesitate to express solidarity and demonstrate before the media. Heidi Morales, who knew him since his arrival in the neighborhood, stated, "Richard was not a rapist. He was a healthy, calm, and hard-working man. He didn't disrespect any woman, and he didn't look sadistic either." Another neighbor, Rebecca Bracho, corroborated this, stating, "This boy was not a rapist. He was always waiting to help the neighbors who asked him for a favor." Over 50 members of Richard's neighborhood left to testify in his favor. While Richard's protective custody had lasted for 2 days, on the third day, he was targeted by a group of inmates, a group that had grown notorious for torturing rapists who had arrived at the prison. Despite the fact that the accusations had not been proven and Richard had not been convicted, the inmates brutally raped him several times, stabbed him in the rectum, and pulled out his intestines, all while he was still alive. His mutilated corpse was found face down with the knife in his anus, and his entrails hanging in the air. Had Richard not been murdered just 1 day before his trial, his innocence would undoubtedly have been confirmed through witness testimony and the fact that just days later, additional attacks were committed by the actual rapist at the university. Not only did Richard suffer a horrific death, but the assault and killing were recorded and circulated online under the misleading title, "Rapist Receives an Eye for an Eye Justice." This image is allegedly from said video. The footage, however, is now apparently difficult to find and often regarded as lost media. I myself have not attempted to locate it. Thank you to all of you here on YouTube, and thank you to all of my Patreon members for your continued support. Jason Varga, AJ Uffrey, Swisham, Babycon Nobu 1220, Mason Alongo, Wuant Superfan, Jake C, Angelina Armstrong, Bailey Lester, Ekaterina, James Warner, and Sibusiso Dlamini.